Question 1. The evaluation methodology shows that an Alabama-based energy company is considering a significant joint venture in a foreign nation to develop new energy resources. Given the international nature of this investment, which risk assessment approach best aligns with the principles of international energy law and prudent corporate governance for an Alabama entity? Option A. Prioritize the immediate economic benefits of the joint venture in the risk assessment, deferring detailed consideration of potential political instability, contract enforceability, and environmental compliance until after the investment is made. Option B. Rely solely on the advice of local counsel in the foreign jurisdiction for risk assessment, without independently verifying the alignment of their advice with broader international energy law principles or Alabama's corporate oversight requirements. Option C. Focus the risk assessment exclusively on Alabama's interstate energy regulations and reporting requirements, assuming that these will adequately cover the company's liabilities in the foreign venture. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that integrates established international energy law principles with a thorough analysis of the specific legal and regulatory environment of the target foreign jurisdiction, including political, economic, and environmental risks, and potential recourse through international arbitration. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that integrates established international energy law principles with a thorough analysis of the specific legal and regulatory environment of the target foreign jurisdiction, including political, economic, and environmental risks, and potential recourse through international arbitration. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows a complex scenario for an Alabama energy company considering an international joint venture. The professional challenge lies in navigating the intersection of Alabama's specific energy regulatory landscape with the broader principles of international energy law, particularly concerning risk assessment for foreign direct investment. Alabama law, while primarily focused on interstate energy matters, does not operate in a vacuum when its companies engage internationally. The company must ensure its risk assessment framework aligns with both its domestic obligations and the evolving international norms that govern cross-border energy projects. This requires a nuanced understanding of how international principles inform domestic decision-making, especially when dealing with political, economic, and environmental risks inherent in foreign ventures. The best approach involves a comprehensive risk assessment that integrates established international energy law principles with a thorough understanding of the specific legal and regulatory environment of the target foreign jurisdiction. This includes analyzing potential political instability, expropriation risks, contract enforceability under international arbitration frameworks, and adherence to international environmental standards and human rights considerations, all while ensuring compliance with any relevant Alabama reporting or approval requirements for outbound investments. This approach is correct because it acknowledges the dual regulatory and legal realities of international energy transactions. It proactively identifies and mitigates risks by leveraging established international legal mechanisms and best practices, thereby protecting the company's investment and reputation. It also implicitly recognizes that, while Alabama law governs the company's corporate existence and certain operational aspects, international law and the laws of the host nation will primarily govern the venture itself. An approach that solely focuses on Alabama's interstate energy regulations, ignoring the specific international legal framework of the host country and general international energy law principles, is fundamentally flawed. This failure would lead to an incomplete risk assessment, potentially exposing the company to unforeseen legal challenges, contract disputes, and regulatory noncompliance in the foreign jurisdiction. Such an approach neglects the critical importance of host country sovereignty and the international legal order governing foreign investment. Another incorrect approach would be to rely exclusively on the legal advice of local counsel in the foreign jurisdiction, without cross-referencing these insights with established international energy law principles and the company's domestic regulatory obligations. While local counsel is essential, their advice might not always encompass the broader international legal context or the specific compliance needs of an Alabama-based entity. This can lead to overlooking international arbitration rights, treaty protections, or broader compliance issues that transcend local law. Finally, an approach that prioritizes short-term economic gains over a thorough assessment of long-term political and legal risks associated with international energy projects is professionally irresponsible. International energy law emphasizes stability, predictability, and the rule of law. Ignoring these principles in favor of immediate profit can lead to significant financial and reputational damage if the project encounters unforeseen legal or political hurdles. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a multidisciplinary team, including legal counsel with expertise in international energy law and the specific host country's legal system, as well as risk management specialists. This team should conduct a layered risk assessment, starting with the company's domestic regulatory obligations, then analyzing the host country's legal and regulatory framework, and finally integrating overarching international energy law principles and best practices for foreign direct investment. Regular review and adaptation of the risk assessment throughout the project lifecycle are also crucial. Question 2. The performance metrics show a significant increase in reported environmental incidents at a new solar farm facility in Alabama. Considering the definition and scope of energy law in Alabama, which of the following actions best addresses this situation? Option A. Conduct a detailed review of the reported incidents against Alabama's environmental permitting requirements and relevant statutes enforced by the Alabama Department of Environmental Management and the Alabama Public Service Commission. Option B. Consult general industry best practices for solar farm environmental management to implement corrective measures. Option C. Prioritize addressing any potential financial implications of the incidents to ensure the facility remains profitable, deferring detailed regulatory review. Option D. Assume the incidents are minor operational issues and monitor them without immediate further investigation, as long as they do not directly impact energy output. Correct answer is A. Conduct a detailed review of the reported incidents against Alabama's environmental permitting requirements and relevant statutes enforced by the Alabama Department of Environmental Management and the Alabama Public Service Commission. Explanation: the performance metrics show a significant increase in reported environmental incidents at a new solar farm facility in Alabama. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a nuanced understanding of Alabama's energy law, specifically concerning the definition and scope of energy law as it applies to renewable energy projects and their environmental impact. A careful judgment is required to determine the appropriate regulatory response and ensure compliance with state statutes and administrative codes. The best professional approach involves a comprehensive review of the facility's operational data against the specific environmental permitting requirements and regulations established by the Alabama Department of Environmental Management, ADEM, and the Alabama Public Service Commission, APSC, for solar energy generation. This includes examining the types of incidents reported, their severity, and whether they fall within the scope of defined environmental hazards under Alabama law. The justification for this approach lies in its direct adherence to the regulatory framework governing energy facilities in Alabama. It prioritizes understanding the specific legal obligations and potential liabilities arising from the facility's operations, ensuring that any response is legally sound and aligned with the state's environmental protection goals. This proactive and legally informed stance is crucial for maintaining compliance and mitigating risks. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the reported incidents as minor operational fluctuations without a thorough legal and regulatory assessment. This fails to acknowledge the potential for cumulative environmental harm or the possibility that these incidents, even if individually minor, could indicate systemic issues that violate specific provisions of Alabama energy and environmental law. Such a dismissal could lead to noncompliance, fines, and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on industry best practices or general environmental guidelines without cross-referencing them with the specific statutes and regulations of Alabama. While industry standards can be informative, they do not supersede or replace the legal requirements mandated by the state. Failure to ground the assessment in Alabama's specific legal framework risks overlooking critical compliance obligations unique to the state. A further incorrect approach would be to focus exclusively on the economic performance of the solar farm, viewing environmental incidents solely through a lens of operational cost or efficiency. This perspective neglects the fundamental legal and ethical responsibilities associated with energy generation, which include protecting public health and the environment as defined by Alabama law. Such a narrow focus can lead to decisions that prioritize profit over legal compliance and environmental stewardship. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should begin with a clear identification of the relevant jurisdiction and its specific regulatory landscape. In this case, it is Alabama. Next, professionals must define the scope of the issue within that legal framework, understanding how the reported events relate to the definition and scope of energy law as applied to the specific type of energy generation. This involves consulting relevant statutes, administrative rules, and commission orders. A thorough risk assessment should then be conducted, evaluating potential legal, environmental, and financial consequences of different courses of action. Finally, decisions should be made based on a robust understanding of legal obligations, ethical responsibilities, and the potential impact on stakeholders and the environment, always prioritizing compliance with the governing jurisdiction's laws. Question 3. Risk assessment procedures indicate that Alabama's energy sector is exploring the integration of emerging technologies like geothermal and hydrogen. When evaluating the feasibility of a new geothermal power project or a large-scale hydrogen production facility within the state, what is the most prudent approach to ensure regulatory compliance and mitigate potential risks? Option A. Prioritize securing federal tax incentives for renewable energy projects, assuming that federal support will streamline state-level regulatory approvals for geothermal and hydrogen initiatives. Option B. Conduct thorough site-specific geological surveys for geothermal potential, detailed analysis of hydrogen production and storage safety protocols, and a comprehensive review of existing Alabama Public Service Commission regulations and any emerging state legislation pertaining to renewable energy and advanced technologies. Option C. Adopt a passive strategy, observing regulatory developments and project implementations in other states before committing to any significant assessment or development activities within Alabama. Option D. Focus primarily on the perceived lower upfront capital costs associated with a particular geothermal drilling technique or hydrogen storage method, deferring detailed safety and regulatory compliance checks until later stages of development. The correct answer is B. Conduct thorough site-specific geological surveys for geothermal potential, detailed analysis of hydrogen production and storage safety protocols, and a comprehensive review of existing Alabama Public Service Commission regulations and any emerging state legislation pertaining to renewable energy and advanced technologies. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves assessing the viability of emerging energy technologies, specifically geothermal and hydrogen, within the evolving regulatory landscape of Alabama. The challenge lies in balancing the potential benefits of these technologies with the inherent risks, the need for robust safety protocols, and compliance with state-specific energy regulations that may not yet fully encompass these novel approaches. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any proposed development aligns with Alabama's energy policy objectives, environmental protection standards, and public safety concerns, while also considering economic feasibility and long-term sustainability. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves conducting a comprehensive risk assessment that prioritizes site-specific geological surveys for geothermal potential, detailed analysis of hydrogen production and storage safety protocols, and a thorough review of existing Alabama Public Service Commission (APSC) regulations and any emerging state legislation pertaining to renewable energy and advanced technologies. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the core requirements of responsible energy development by grounding the assessment in empirical data, geological surveys, established safety engineering principles, hydrogen protocols, and the governing legal framework of Alabama. It ensures that any proposed project is evaluated against the specific environmental, safety, and regulatory standards applicable within the state, thereby minimizing potential harm and maximizing the likelihood of successful, compliant implementation. Incorrect approaches analysis, focusing solely on the potential for federal tax incentives without a concurrent, rigorous assessment of Alabama's specific regulatory environment and site suitability is professionally unacceptable. This approach risks pursuing projects that may be technically or legally unfeasible within the state, leading to wasted resources and potential noncompliance. Prioritizing the perceived lower, upfront capital costs of a particular technology over a thorough evaluation of its long-term operational risks, safety implication, and adherence to Alabama's environmental regulations is also professionally unsound. This oversight can lead to unforeseen liabilities, safety hazards, and regulatory penalties, undermining the project's viability and potentially harming the public interest. Adopting a wait-and-see approach, relying on other states to pioneer these technologies and establish regulatory precedents, while potentially reducing immediate risk, fails to proactively engage with Alabama's specific energy needs and opportunities. This passive stance can lead to missed economic development prospects and a failure to contribute to the state's energy diversification goals, and it does not fulfill the professional obligation to assess and advise on emerging technologies within the current regulatory context. Professional reasoning. Professionals tasked with evaluating emerging energy technologies in Alabama should adopt a systematic, data-driven, and legally compliant approach. This involves 1. Understanding the specific technological requirements and inherent risks of geothermal and hydrogen energy. 2. Thoroughly researching and applying relevant Alabama state laws, APSC regulations, and environmental standards. 3. Conducting detailed site-specific assessments, including geological surveys for geothermal and comprehensive safety analyses for hydrogen. 4. Evaluating potential economic benefits in conjunction with all identified risks and regulatory obligations. 5. Engaging with state regulatory bodies to ensure alignment with current and anticipated policy directions. This structured decision-making process ensures that assessments are grounded in reality, compliant with law, and ethically sound, prioritizing safety, environmental protection, and the long-term interests of the state. Question 4. The audit findings indicate that a proposed energy infrastructure project in Alabama may not have adequately addressed potential environmental risks during its initial environmental impact assessment, IA. Which of the following approaches best reflects the professional and regulatory requirements for conducting such an assessment under Alabama law? Option A. Delegate the entire responsibility for risk assessment to an external environmental consulting firm without establishing clear internal oversight or review mechanisms to verify the thoroughness of their findings. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that systematically identifies potential environmental hazards, evaluates their likelihood and severity, and proposes specific mitigation strategies for all phases of the project, ensuring alignment with the Alabama Environmental Management Act. Option C. Prioritize cost-saving measures by limiting the scope of the EIA to only the most obvious potential impacts and utilizing readily available, but potentially outdated, environmental data. Option D. Focus on fulfilling the minimum documentation requirements outlined by the Alabama Department of Environmental Management for EIAs, assuming that standard industry practices will inherently mitigate most environmental concerns. Correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that systematically identifies potential environmental hazards, evaluates their likelihood and severity, and proposes specific mitigation strategies for all phases of the project, ensuring alignment with the Alabama Environmental Management Act. Explanation. The audit findings indicate a potential oversight in the Environmental Impact Assessment (IA) process for a new energy project in Alabama. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the economic benefits of energy development with the imperative to protect Alabama's natural resources and comply with state environmental regulations. A failure to conduct a thorough EIA can lead to significant environmental damage, legal penalties, and reputational harm for the company and the individuals involved. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all potential environmental impacts are identified, assessed, and mitigated according to the Alabama Environmental Management Act, EMA, and its associated regulations. The best approach involves a comprehensive risk assessment that systematically identifies potential environmental hazards associated with the project, evaluates their likelihood and severity, and proposes specific mitigation strategies. This aligns with the proactive and precautionary principles embedded in Alabama's environmental review processes. By prioritizing the identification of potential impacts on air quality, water resources, soil, biodiversity, and cultural resources, and then developing concrete plans to avoid, minimize, or offset these impacts. The project demonstrates a commitment to responsible development and regulatory compliance. This approach ensures that the EIA is not merely a procedural hurdle, but a robust tool for environmental stewardship, as envisioned by the EMA. An approach that focuses solely on meeting the minimum documentation requirements without a deep dive into potential risks is professionally unacceptable. This failure to conduct a thorough risk assessment means that significant environmental threats might be overlooked, leading to noncompliance with the EMA mandate for comprehensive environmental protection. Similarly, an approach that prioritizes cost-cutting by limiting the scope of the EIA or relying on outdated data risks inadequate identification of impacts. This not only violates the spirit of the EMA, but also exposes the project to unforeseen environmental consequences and potential legal challenges. Finally, an approach that defers responsibility for risk assessment to external consultants without adequate internal oversight or review fails to establish accountability and can result in a superficial or incomplete evaluation, again contravening the EMA intent for diligent environmental review. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the specific requirements of the EMA and relevant Alabama Department of Environmental Management, ADEM, guidelines. This involves a systematic process of hazard identification, impact analysis, and mitigation planning, with a strong emphasis on data integrity and expert consultation. Regular internal reviews and stakeholder engagement are crucial to ensure the EIA is comprehensive, accurate, and effectively addresses potential environmental risks. Question 5. The evaluation methodology shows that when considering the development of new energy infrastructure in Alabama, a comprehensive risk assessment is crucial. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the regulatory framework and public interest considerations for the Public Service Commission of Alabama? Option A. Approving energy projects based primarily on the lobbying efforts of energy providers, with minimal independent review of their environmental or economic justifications. Option B. Prioritizing immediate cost reductions for consumers by selecting the cheapest available energy sources, without extensive analysis of their long-term environmental or supply implications. Option C. Focusing solely on meeting current energy demand with readily available technologies, without projecting future needs or considering the potential for technological disruption. Option D. Conducting a thorough risk assessment that quantifies potential environmental impacts, evaluates long-term economic viability, and assesses supply reliability under various scenarios, all within the context of Alabama's energy statutes and PSC regulations. The correct answer is D. Conducting a thorough risk assessment that quantifies potential environmental impacts, evaluates long-term economic viability, and assesses supply reliability under various scenarios, all within the context of Alabama's energy statutes and PSC regulations. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing competing interests, ensuring reliable energy supply for Alabama residents, adhering to evolving environmental regulations, and managing the financial implications of energy infrastructure development. The Public Service Commission of Alabama, PSC, must make a decision that is both legally sound and serves the public good. Navigating a complex web of state statutes, PSC rules, and federal mandates that may influence energy policy and governance. The inherent uncertainty in future energy demand, technological advancements, and environmental impact assessments adds further complexity, demanding a forward-thinking and robust risk assessment methodology. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves a comprehensive risk assessment that quantifies potential environmental impacts, evaluates the long-term economic viability of proposed energy sources, and assesses the reliability of supply under various scenarios, all within the framework of Alabama's energy statutes and PSC regulations. This methodology directly addresses the PSC's mandate to ensure just and reasonable rates and adequate service, while also considering the state's commitment to environmental stewardship as outlined in relevant Alabama code provisions. By systematically identifying, analyzing, and mitigating risks, the PSC can make an informed decision that aligns with public interest and regulatory requirements. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to prioritize short-term cost savings without a thorough evaluation of long-term environmental consequences or supply reliability. This fails to meet the PSC's duty to ensure adequate service and can lead to future costs associated with environmental remediation or infrastructure upgrades, potentially violating the spirit of Alabama's energy policy, which aims for sustainable and reliable energy provision. Another incorrect approach is to solely focus on meeting current energy demand without considering future projections or the potential for disruptive technologies. This neglects the forward-looking aspect of energy governance and could result in an inadequate or outdated energy infrastructure for Alabama, contravening the PSC's responsibility to ensure a stable and sufficient energy supply for the state's future. A third incorrect approach is to disregard potential impacts on vulnerable populations or specific regions within Alabama when evaluating energy projects. Alabama's energy policy and PSC regulations implicitly require consideration of equitable access to energy and the fair distribution of benefits and burdens, making an approach that overlooks these factors professionally and ethically deficient. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field should adopt a structured decision-making process that begins with clearly defining the objectives and constraints based on Alabama's energy laws and PSC rules. This should be followed by a thorough data-gathering phase, incorporating technical, economic, environmental, and social considerations. A systematic risk assessment, as described in the correct approach, is crucial for evaluating potential outcomes. Finally, decisions should be transparent, well-documented, and justifiable based on the evidence and regulatory framework, allowing for public scrutiny and accountability. Question 6. What factors determine the most effective approach for an energy company operating in Alabama to manage its regulatory compliance obligations concerning emissions and pollution control under state and federal law? Option A. A reliance on the advice of out-of-state environmental consultants who are familiar with broad environmental regulations. Option B. A comprehensive risk assessment that integrates current and anticipated Alabama Department of Environmental Management, ADEM, regulations, Federal Clean Air Act requirements, and proactive engagement with ADEM. Option C. A focus on implementing only the minimum legally mandated pollution control measures to minimize immediate operational costs. Option D. A review of historical compliance data and adherence to general industry, best practices for pollution control. The correct answer is B. A comprehensive risk assessment that integrates current and anticipated Alabama Department of Environmental Management, ADEM regulations, Federal Clean Air Act requirements, and proactive engagement with ADEM. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an energy company operating in Alabama due to the complex and evolving regulatory landscape surrounding emissions and pollution control. The challenge lies in balancing operational efficiency and economic viability with the imperative to comply with stringent environmental laws, which can involve significant capital investment and operational adjustments. Failure to accurately assess and manage these risks can lead to substantial fines, reputational damage, and operational disruptions. Careful judgment is required to interpret the nuances of Alabama's environmental regulations and apply them effectively to specific operational contexts. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a proactive and comprehensive risk assessment that integrates current and anticipated Alabama Department of Environmental Management, ADEM, regulations, including specific provisions under the Alabama Environmental Management Act and relevant Federal Clean Air Act requirements as delegated to the state. This approach necessitates a thorough review of existing permits, emissions data, and operational processes to identify potential noncompliance areas. It also requires forecasting future regulatory changes, such as potential updates to National Ambient Air Quality Standards, NOx, or new state-specific emission limits for particular pollutants. Engaging environmental consultants with expertise in Alabama law and maintaining open communication with ADEM are crucial components of this strategy. This ensures that the company not only meets current legal obligations, but also prepares for future compliance, minimizing the likelihood of penalties and operational interruptions. Incorrect approaches analysis. Focusing solely on historical compliance data without considering upcoming regulatory changes is a flawed approach. Alabama's environmental regulations are subject to revision, and past compliance does not guarantee future adherence. This oversight can lead to unexpected noncompliance when new standards are enacted, resulting in penalties and the need for costly retrofits. Another incorrect approach is to prioritize cost savings over environmental compliance by implementing only the minimum required pollution control measures without a thorough risk assessment. While seemingly economical in the short term, this strategy ignores the potential for future regulatory tightening and the significant financial and reputational consequences of noncompliance. It also fails to consider the ethical imperative to protect public health and the environment. Relying exclusively on general industry best practices without specific reference to Alabama's regulatory framework is also problematic. While industry standards can be informative, they do not supersede state-specific legal requirements. Alabama may have unique emission limits, permitting procedures, or enforcement priorities that general best practices do not address, leading to potential violations. Professional reasoning. Professionals in the energy sector in Alabama must adopt a systematic and forward-looking approach to emissions and pollution control. This involves establishing a robust compliance management system that includes 1. Regulatory monitoring, continuously tracking updates and proposed changes to ADEM regulations and relevant federal laws. 2. Impact assessment, evaluating the potential impact of these regulations on current operations and future projects. 3. Risk identification and prioritization, identifying areas of potential noncompliance and prioritizing mitigation efforts based on risk severity and likelihood. 4. Compliance planning, developing and implementing strategies to achieve and maintain compliance, including technological upgrades, process modifications, and employee training. 5. Stakeholder engagement, maintaining open communication with regulatory bodies like ADEM and engaging with environmental experts. This comprehensive framework ensures that environmental responsibilities are met proactively, safeguarding the company's operational integrity and its commitment to environmental stewardship within the specific legal context of Alabama. Question 7. The control framework reveals that an energy generation facility in Alabama, established in the mid-20th century under then-prevailing environmental regulations, is now facing increased public and regulatory scrutiny regarding its historical operational practices and their ongoing environmental impact. Considering the evolution of environmental law in Alabama, which of the following represents the most professionally responsible and legally sound approach for the facility's management to address these concerns? Option A. Conduct a minimal internal review of historical records and provide only the information explicitly requested by regulators, without initiating any independent assessment of current environmental impact. Option B. Assert that the facility has always operated in compliance with the laws and permits in effect at the time of its establishment, and therefore is not subject to current regulatory review for historical practices. Option C. Proactively engage with the Alabama Department of Environmental Management to review existing permits, assess current environmental performance against contemporary state and federal standards, and develop a collaborative plan for any necessary upgrades or remediation. Option D. Continue operations without significant changes, relying on the historical nature of the facility to preemptively address any new environmental concerns raised by the public or regulators. The correct answer is C. Proactively engage with the Alabama Department of Environmental Management to review existing permits, assess current environmental performance against contemporary state and federal standards, and develop a collaborative plan for any necessary upgrades or remediation. Explanation. The control framework reveals a scenario where a historical energy project in Alabama, established during a period of less stringent environmental oversight, is now facing scrutiny due to evolving regulatory standards and public concern regarding its long-term environmental impact. This situation is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the economic realities of an established industry with the imperative to comply with current and anticipated environmental regulations, while also considering the legacy of past practices. Careful judgment is required to navigate the complexities of historical context, economic viability, and environmental stewardship within the specific legal landscape of Alabama. The best professional approach involves proactively engaging with the Alabama Department of Environmental Management, ADEM, to understand their current interpretation of relevant statutes, such as the Alabama Environmental Management Act and any applicable federal regulations that Alabama has adopted. This approach prioritizes transparency and collaboration, seeking to identify potential compliance gaps and develop a remediation or modernization plan that aligns with contemporary environmental protection goals. This is correct because it demonstrates a commitment to responsible corporate citizenship and adherence to the spirit and letter of Alabama's environmental laws, which are designed to protect public health and natural resources. It also allows for a more predictable and manageable path forward, potentially avoiding more severe penalties or mandated actions later. An incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the permits and operational standards that were in place at the time of the project's inception, arguing that compliance was met under the laws of that era. It fails to acknowledge that environmental laws are dynamic and that ongoing compliance with current regulations is a continuous obligation. Alabama law, like that of other states, anticipates the need for adaptation to new scientific understanding and societal expectations regarding environmental protection. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the concerns raised and continue operations as before, assuming that the historical nature of the project grants it immunity from modern regulatory review. This is professionally unacceptable, as it disregards the state's authority to enforce environmental standards and protect its citizens and natural resources. Such inaction could lead to significant legal repercussions, including fines, injunctions, and reputational damage. A further incorrect approach would be to engage in minimal, superficial engagement with regulators, providing only the information that is strictly required without offering any proactive solutions or demonstrating a genuine commitment to addressing potential environmental issues. This approach, while technically meeting some disclosure requirements, lacks the ethical imperative to actively contribute to environmental protection and may be perceived as obstructionist by regulatory bodies. The professional reasoning process for navigating such situations should involve a thorough review of the project's history, a comprehensive assessment of current environmental performance against all applicable Alabama and federal regulations, and open communication with regulatory agencies. Professionals should seek expert legal and environmental counsel to interpret complex regulations and develop strategic plans that ensure long-term compliance and responsible operation. Question 8. Compliance review shows that a major energy producer operating in Alabama has been using a wastewater discharge system that was permitted under older state regulations. While the system has not received any formal notices of violation from the Alabama Department of Environmental Management, ADEM, recent internal discussions have raised concerns about whether the current operational practices fully align with the spirit and intent of the Alabama Environmental Management Act (EMA) and the Alabama Surface Mining Reclamation Act (ASMR), particularly concerning potential impacts on local water quality and land restoration. What is the most prudent and professionally responsible course of action for the energy producer? Option A. Focus on maintaining operational efficiency and cost-effectiveness, deferring any potential upgrades to pollution control or reclamation methods until explicitly mandated by ADEM. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive internal audit of all wastewater discharge and land reclamation practices against current state regulations and permit requirements, and if any discrepancies are found, immediately develop and implement a corrective action plan. Option C. Assume that compliance with Federal Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act standards automatically fulfills all Alabama-specific environmental obligations. Option D. Continue current operations as long as no formal notices of violation have been issued by ADEM, assuming that existing permits and historical compliance are sufficient. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive internal audit of all wastewater discharge and land reclamation practices against current state regulations and permit requirements, and if any discrepancies are found, immediately develop and implement a corrective action plan. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires navigating the complex interplay between established energy infrastructure, evolving environmental regulations, and the economic realities of energy production in Alabama. The need for careful judgment stems from the potential for significant financial penalties, reputational damage, and operational disruptions if regulatory compliance is not meticulously maintained. The core issue is ensuring that the company's operational practices align with the specific mandates of Alabama's energy and environmental laws. The best professional approach involves proactively identifying and addressing potential noncompliance by conducting a thorough internal audit of all relevant operational processes against the Alabama Environmental Management Act (EMA) and the Alabama Surface Mining Reclamation Act (ASMR). This approach is correct because it demonstrates a commitment to regulatory adherence and risk mitigation. By systematically reviewing permits, emission reports, waste disposal records, and reclamation plans, the company can identify any discrepancies or areas of potential violation before they are discovered by regulatory bodies. This proactive stance allows for timely corrective actions, minimizing the likelihood of enforcement actions and associated penalties. It aligns with the ethical obligation of corporate responsibility and the legal requirement to operate within the bounds of state law. An incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the absence of formal notices of violation from the Alabama Department of Environmental Management, ADEM. This is professionally unacceptable because it adopts a passive and reactive stance. Regulatory agencies do not necessarily discover all instances of noncompliance, and the absence of a notice does not equate to actual compliance. Waiting for an official inquiry leaves the company vulnerable to unforeseen penalties and remediation costs if violations are discovered during an inspection. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that compliance with federal regulations under the Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act automatically satisfies all Alabama-specific requirements. While federal laws set a baseline, Alabama often has its own stringent regulations that may go beyond federal minimums. This approach is professionally unacceptable as it ignores the specific statutory authority granted to ADEM and the potential for state-specific enforcement actions. Alabama's laws are designed to address unique state environmental concerns and may impose additional obligations not covered by federal mandates. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to prioritize cost savings by delaying necessary upgrades to pollution control equipment, arguing that current equipment meets historical operational standards. This is professionally unacceptable because it disregards the dynamic nature of environmental regulations and the potential for new or updated standards to come into effect. Furthermore, it fails to acknowledge the company's ongoing duty to operate in an environmentally responsible manner, which may necessitate proactive investment in cleaner technologies even in the absence of immediate regulatory mandates. This approach prioritizes short-term financial gain over long-term legal and ethical compliance. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that emphasizes a proactive, comprehensive, and informed approach to regulatory compliance. This involves staying abreast of all applicable federal, state, and local laws, conducting regular internal audits, seeking expert legal and environmental counsel when necessary, and fostering a corporate culture that prioritizes ethical conduct and environmental stewardship. The goal should always be to exceed minimum compliance standards where feasible, thereby safeguarding the company's operational integrity and reputation. Question 9. Compliance review shows that an Alabama-based utility is exploring new energy storage solutions to enhance grid reliability and integrate renewable energy sources. They are considering a large-scale battery energy storage system utilizing a novel battery chemistry, as well as evaluating the potential for a new pumped hydro storage facility in a suitable geographic area within the state. What is the most prudent course of action for the utility to ensure compliance with Alabama's energy and environmental regulations? Option A. Prioritize the battery storage system due to its perceived technological advancement and potential for faster deployment, assuming that environmental regulations for novel technologies will be less stringent. Option B. Immediately pursue the pumped hydro storage facility as it represents a more established technology, without a detailed assessment of its specific environmental impact or economic viability in the chosen Alabama location. Option C. Focus solely on the cost-effectiveness of the battery storage system, deferring detailed environmental and regulatory compliance checks until after initial project approval. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive environmental impact assessment for the battery storage system, including material life cycle analysis and disposal plans, and perform a detailed feasibility study for the pumped hydro facility, considering site-specific environmental and engineering factors, while consulting relevant Alabama Public Service Commission guidelines for energy storage integration. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive environmental impact assessment for the battery storage system, including material life cycle analysis and disposal plans, and perform a detailed feasibility study for the pumped hydro facility, considering site-specific environmental and engineering factors, while consulting relevant Alabama Public Service Commission guidelines for energy storage integration. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the pursuit of innovative energy storage solutions with strict adherence to Alabama's regulatory framework governing energy infrastructure development and environmental protection. Complexity arises from the need to assess the long-term viability and environmental impact of a novel battery storage technology, which may not have established precedents within existing Alabama law, while also considering the potential benefits of pumped hydro storage as a more traditional, albeit geographically constrained, option. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any proposed solution aligns with the public interest, environmental sustainability, and the economic realities of energy provision in Alabama. The best professional approach involves a comprehensive, multifaceted evaluation that prioritizes regulatory compliance and long-term sustainability. This entails conducting a thorough environmental impact assessment for the proposed battery storage facility, specifically addressing concerns related to material sourcing, disposal, and potential site contamination, in accordance with Alabama's environmental protection statutes. Simultaneously, a detailed feasibility study should be undertaken to assess the economic viability, grid integration capabilities, and operational reliability of the battery technology, considering any relevant Alabama Public Service Commission (PSC) guidelines or directives on energy storage. This approach ensures that all potential risks and benefits are identified and addressed within the existing legal and regulatory landscape of Alabama. An approach that focuses solely on the immediate cost savings of the battery technology, without a commensurate environmental impact assessment, is professionally unacceptable. Failure to consider environmental regulations, such as those administered by the Alabama Department of Environmental Management, could lead to significant legal penalties, reputational damage, and long-term environmental liabilities. Similarly, advocating for the pumped hydro option solely based on its established nature, without a thorough analysis of its site-specific feasibility and potential ecological disruption in Alabama, would be a flawed strategy. This overlooks the need to explore all viable, compliant solutions, and could lead to the rejection of a potentially beneficial technology due to an incomplete assessment. Finally, prioritizing a technology based on industry hype without rigorous due diligence regarding its specific application within Alabama's regulatory context and grid infrastructure would be irresponsible, potentially leading to noncompliance and project failure. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the applicable Alabama laws and PSC regulations. This framework should then involve a systematic evaluation of all potential energy storage solutions, considering their technical feasibility, economic viability, environmental impact, and regulatory compliance. A risk-benefit analysis, grounded in data and expert opinion, should guide the selection process, ensuring that the chosen solution maximizes benefits while minimizing risks and adhering to all legal and ethical obligations within Alabama. Question 10. Compliance review shows that a residential solar photovoltaic system in Montgomery, Alabama, exported 500 kilowatt-hours, kWh, of electricity to the grid in a billing period. The retail rate for electricity in that period was $0.12 per kWh, and the average wholesale market price for electricity was $0.07 per kWh. Utility company is proposing to credit the customer for the exported energy at the wholesale market price. What is the correct method to calculate the economic value of the exported energy for the customer's bill, and what is the resulting value? Option A. Calculate the value by averaging the retail and wholesale prices and multiplying by the exported kWh, 500 kWh asterisk, $0.12 plus $0.07/2/kWh equals $47.50. Option B. Calculate the value by multiplying the exported kWh by the retail rate minus transmission and distribution charges, assuming these are $0.03/kWh, 500 kWh asterisk $0.12/0.03/kWh equals $45.00. Option C. Calculate the value by multiplying the exported kWh by the retail rate. 500 kWh asterisk $0. 12/kWh equals $60. 00. Option D. Calculate the value by multiplying the exported kWh by the wholesale market price. 500 kWh asterisk $0. 07/kWh equals $35. 00. Correct answer is C. Calculate the value by multiplying the exported kWh by the retail rate. 500 kWh asterisk $0. 12/kWh equals $60. 00. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in energy markets, accurately valuing and accounting for the economic benefits of renewable energy generation, specifically solar photovoltaic PV systems, within the context of Alabama's net metering regulations. The complexity arises from the need to reconcile the wholesale market price of electricity with the retail rate at which excess generation is credited to the customer. Misinterpreting these regulations can lead to financial misstatements, regulatory noncompliance, and potentially disputes with customers and the Alabama Public Service Commission. APSC. The core challenge is to apply the correct economic valuation methodology that aligns with Alabama's specific legal framework for distributed generation. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves calculating the value of the exported solar energy by applying the retail rate for electricity, as stipulated by Alabama's net metering rules for residential customers. This is because Alabama law, specifically as interpreted and enforced by the APSC, mandates that net metering customers receive a credit for excess generation at the full retail rate they would otherwise pay for electricity. This ensures that the customer is not penalized for generating their own power and effectively offsets their consumption. The calculation would be value of exported energy equals kilowatt hours exported to the grid X retail rate per kilowatt hour. This directly reflects the economic benefit to the customer as intended by the net metering policy. Incorrect approaches analysis. An approach that values the exported energy at the wholesale market price, e.g., the average price paid by the utility to generators, is incorrect because Alabama's net metering statute is designed to provide a retail credit, not a wholesale credit. This would undervalue the exported energy from the customer's perspective and misrepresent the economic benefit of their solar investment. It fails to adhere to the specific terms of the net metering program as established by the APSC. Another incorrect approach would be to use a blended rate that averages the retail and wholesale prices. This is not supported by Alabama's net metering regulations, which clearly indicate a retail rate credit for exported energy. Such a blended rate would arbitrarily reduce the credit received by the customer and deviate from the established regulatory framework. Finally, an approach that deducts transmission and distribution charges from the retail rate before applying it to exported energy is also incorrect. Alabama's net metering rules generally credit excess generation at the full retail rate, which implicitly includes these charges. Deducting them would effectively create a lower credit than what is mandated, similar to using a wholesale rate. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Alabama's energy sector must prioritize a thorough understanding of the state's specific net metering statutes and APSC rulings. When faced with valuing distributed generation, the decision-making process should begin with identifying the applicable regulatory framework. This involves consulting the relevant Alabama code sections and APSC orders pertaining to net metering and distributed energy resources. The next step is to determine how excess generation is credited to the customer under that framework. If the regulation specifies a retail rate credit, then all calculations must adhere to that rate. If there is ambiguity, seeking clarification from the APSC or legal counsel specializing in Alabama energy law is crucial. The professional's duty is to ensure financial accuracy and regulatory compliance, which necessitates a precise application of the law to the economic realities of energy generation and consumption. Question 11. Compliance review shows that an independent power producer in Alabama is considering adjustments to its wholesale electricity pricing strategy in anticipation of a projected increase in regional demand. The producer has access to proprietary data regarding generation costs, transmission availability, and anticipated market clearing prices. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action for the producer to take regarding its pricing strategy in Alabama? Option A. Inflate reported generation costs and operational expenses to justify a higher wholesale electricity price to the APSC. Option B. Initiate discussions with other independent power producers in the region to coordinate pricing strategies and ensure mutually beneficial wholesale electricity rates. Option C. Strategically reduce the available generation capacity during peak demand periods to capitalize on anticipated higher market clearing prices. Option D. Transparently report all relevant generation and transmission cost data to the Alabama Public Service Commission, APSC, and adhere to the established market price reporting mechanisms for wholesale electricity transactions. The correct answer is D. Transparently report all relevant generation and transmission cost data to the Alabama Public Service Commission, APSC, and adhere to the established market price reporting mechanisms for wholesale electricity transactions. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an energy producer to navigate the complex interplay between market-driven price formation and regulatory oversight in Alabama's energy sector. The producer must balance the pursuit of profitability with the obligation to adhere to established pricing mechanisms and avoid any actions that could be construed as market manipulation or unfair pricing practices under Alabama law. Careful judgment is required to ensure that pricing strategies are both economically sound and legally compliant, particularly when considering the impact on consumers and the overall stability of the energy market. The best approach involves transparently reporting all relevant data and adhering strictly to the established price reporting mechanisms mandated by the Alabama Public Service Commission, APSC, for wholesale electricity transactions. This includes accurately reflecting the costs of generation, transmission, and any other factors that contribute to the final price, as well as complying with any specific reporting requirements for market participants. This approach is correct because it aligns with the APSC mandate to ensure fair and reasonable energy prices for consumers and to maintain an orderly market. Transparency and adherence to established procedures are fundamental to preventing price gouging and ensuring that prices reflect genuine supply and demand dynamics, as envisioned by Alabama's regulatory framework for energy pricing. An approach that involves strategically withholding generation capacity during periods of high demand to artificially inflate prices would be professionally unacceptable. This action directly contravenes the principles of fair competition and could be interpreted as market manipulation, violating Alabama's regulations designed to protect consumers from excessive pricing. Such behavior undermines the integrity of the energy market and could lead to significant penalties. Another unacceptable approach would be to engage in price collusion with other energy producers to set prices above market rates. This practice is explicitly prohibited by antitrust laws and energy regulations, as it stifles competition and harms consumers. Alabama's regulatory framework is designed to prevent such anti-competitive behavior and ensure that prices are determined by market forces, not by agreements between market participants. Finally, an approach that involves misrepresenting generation costs or operational data to justify higher prices would also be professionally unacceptable. This constitutes fraudulent behavior and directly violates the APSC requirement for accurate reporting. Such deception erodes trust in the energy market and can lead to severe legal and financial repercussions. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance, market integrity, and ethical conduct. This involves thoroughly understanding the specific pricing regulations and reporting requirements set forth by the APSC, conducting regular internal audits to ensure data accuracy, and seeking legal counsel when uncertain about the legality or ethical implications of pricing strategies. A commitment to transparency and fair play is paramount in maintaining a sustainable and trustworthy energy market in Alabama. Question 12. Compliance review shows that a solar energy developer is planning a new utility-scale solar farm in rural Alabama. The developer is eager to maximize financial returns and is primarily focused on securing the federal investment tax credit (ITC). What is the most prudent approach for the developer to ensure the project's success and compliance within Alabama's energy regulatory landscape? Option A. Proceed with project development based on general renewable energy best practices, without a detailed investigation into Alabama's specific regulatory framework, as federal incentives are the primary driver. Option B. Conduct a thorough review of Alabama's specific net metering policies, interconnection standards, and any state-level solar incentives or mandates, ensuring the project design and operational plan align with these requirements. Option C. Focus solely on the technical aspects of solar panel efficiency and grid connection, assuming that state-level regulations will be straightforward and easily accommodated post-installation. Option D. Prioritize securing the federal investment tax credit and assume that standard interconnection agreements and net metering practices from other states are generally applicable in Alabama. Correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough review of Alabama's specific net metering policies, interconnection standards, and any state-level solar incentives or mandates, ensuring the project design and operational plan align with these requirements. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires navigating the complex interplay between state-specific renewable energy incentives, federal tax credits, and the potential for unintended consequences on local grid stability and existing energy infrastructure. A solar developer must balance maximizing financial returns with responsible environmental stewardship and adherence to Alabama's regulatory framework for distributed generation. Misinterpreting or misapplying these regulations can lead to significant financial penalties, project delays, and damage to the developer's reputation. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a comprehensive review of Alabama's specific net metering rules, interconnection standards, and any state-level solar incentives or mandates, such as those potentially established by the Alabama Public Service Commission, APSC, or relevant legislative acts concerning renewable energy. This approach prioritizes understanding and complying with the precise legal and regulatory landscape governing solar installations within Alabama. It ensures that the project is designed and implemented in a manner that aligns with state policy objectives, such as promoting renewable energy adoption, while safeguarding grid reliability and fair compensation for generated electricity. This proactive compliance strategy minimizes legal risks and maximizes the likelihood of successful project approval and operation. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to solely focus on maximizing the federal investment tax credit without thoroughly investigating Alabama's specific net metering policies. This failure to account for state-level regulations could lead to a project that is financially viable at the federal level, but ineligible for state-specific benefits or subject to unfavorable net metering rates, rendering the project economically unfeasible in Alabama. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that standard interconnection agreements used in other states are directly applicable in Alabama. Each state, and often each utility within a state, has unique interconnection requirements and technical standards. Proceeding without verifying and adhering to Alabama's specific interconnection rules could result in delays, costly retrofits, or outright rejection of the project by the local utility. A further incorrect approach would be to disregard potential impacts on the local grid infrastructure based on the assumption that the solar installation is small enough to have no effect. Alabama's regulations, like those in other states, often require impact studies or adherence to specific capacity limits for distributed generation to ensure grid stability. Ignoring these considerations can lead to regulatory noncompliance and potential grid disruption. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field must adopt a systematic approach to project development. This begins with a deep dive into the specific regulatory environment of the jurisdiction in question. For Alabama, this means consulting the Alabama Public Service Commission's APSC regulations, relevant state statutes concerning renewable energy, and the specific tariffs and interconnection standards of the local electric utility. A thorough understanding of these elements allows for the development of a project plan that is not only financially sound, but also legally compliant and technically feasible within the state's framework. When faced with ambiguity, seeking clarification from regulatory bodies or legal counsel specializing in Alabama energy law is a critical step in responsible decision-making. Question 13. Process analysis reveals that a nuclear power facility in Alabama has detected a minor anomaly in a secondary cooling system component during routine testing. While initial internal assessments suggest the anomaly is unlikely to pose an immediate threat to public health or the environment, its long-term implications are not yet fully understood. What is the most appropriate course of action for the facility operator under Alabama's regulatory framework for nuclear energy? Option A. Immediately initiate a comprehensive internal investigation to fully understand the anomaly's cause and potential impact, and simultaneously notify the Alabama Department of Public Health and the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission of the detected anomaly. Option B. Document the anomaly and the planned internal corrective actions, and proceed with normal operations without notifying any external regulatory bodies, assuming the anomaly is minor. Option C. Conduct a thorough internal assessment to determine if the anomaly has caused any actual safety impact before reporting it to any external regulatory bodies. Option D. Delay reporting the anomaly to the Alabama Department of Public Health and the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission until the internal investigation is complete and a definitive safety impact can be confirmed. The correct answer is A. Immediately initiate a comprehensive internal investigation to fully understand the anomaly's cause and potential impact, and simultaneously notify the Alabama Department of Public Health and the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission of the detected anomaly. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent risks associated with nuclear energy operations and the stringent regulatory environment in Alabama. A facility operator must balance operational efficiency with paramount safety concerns, navigating complex federal and state regulations designed to protect public health and the environment. The need for timely reporting of potential safety deviations, even when the immediate impact is uncertain, requires a proactive and transparent approach. The correct approach involves immediate, comprehensive internal investigation and prompt notification to the Alabama Department of Public Health (ADV) and the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission (NRC) upon discovery of a potential safety deviation, regardless of immediate perceived impact. This aligns with the principles of the Atomic Energy Act and Alabama's specific radiation control regulations, which mandate reporting of any event that could potentially compromise safety or security. Transparency and promptness are critical to allowing regulatory bodies to assess the situation, provide guidance, and ensure appropriate corrective actions are taken, thereby upholding the highest standards of nuclear safety and public trust. An incorrect approach would be to delay reporting while conducting a preliminary internal assessment without notifying the relevant authorities. This failure to adhere to prompt reporting requirements, as stipulated by both federal and state regulations, could be interpreted as an attempt to downplay or conceal a potential issue. Such a delay undermines the regulatory oversight framework, prevents timely intervention by experts, and erodes public confidence. Another incorrect approach is to only report the deviation if it is definitively confirmed to have caused a safety impact. This reactive stance is contrary to the precautionary principle embedded in nuclear regulation. Regulations often require reporting of potential safety issues or deviations from established safety parameters, not just confirmed incidents. Waiting for definitive impact can lead to missed opportunities for early mitigation and can be seen as a violation of the spirit and letter of safety reporting obligations. Finally, an approach that involves only internal documentation and corrective actions without any external notification is fundamentally flawed. While internal corrective actions are essential, they do not absolve the operator of their reporting responsibilities to regulatory bodies. This omission bypasses crucial oversight and can lead to significant penalties and loss of operational license. Professionals in this field should employ a decision-making process that prioritizes regulatory compliance and safety above all else. This involves establishing clear internal protocols for identifying, assessing, and reporting potential safety deviations. When in doubt about the severity or reporting threshold of an issue, the professional standard is to err on the side of caution and report promptly to the relevant authorities, seeking their guidance. A culture of open communication and transparency with regulators is paramount. Question 14. Compliance review shows that an Alabama-based energy producer is considering its pricing strategy in response to escalating international tensions that have led to significant disruptions in global oil and natural gas supply chains. The company's internal analysis indicates a strong likelihood of increased wholesale energy costs in the coming months, which will inevitably affect prices for consumers and businesses across Alabama. What is the most responsible and compliant course of action for the energy producer to take? Option A. Proactively monitor global energy market indicators and geopolitical developments transparently communicate potential price fluctuations and their underlying global causes to stakeholders, and maintain robust internal risk management strategies to ensure fair pricing practices in compliance with Alabama's energy market regulations. Option B. Inform only major industrial clients about the impending price increases and the global factors driving them, while maintaining current pricing for residential and smaller commercial customers without explanation. Option C. Immediately implement a significant increase in wholesale energy prices to preemptively cover anticipated future cost increases, citing the general global instability as justification. Option D. Make no adjustments to current pricing or operational strategies, assuming that market forces will eventually self-correct without any need for proactive measures or communication. Correct answer is A. Proactively monitor global energy market indicators and geopolitical developments, transparently communicate potential price fluctuations and their underlying global causes to stakeholders, and maintain robust internal risk management strategies to ensure fair pricing practices in compliance with Alabama's energy market regulations. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an energy producer in Alabama to navigate the complex interplay between global geopolitical events and their impact on local energy prices, while adhering to specific state regulations and ethical obligations to stakeholders. The challenge lies in forecasting and responding to price volatility without engaging in practices that could be deemed manipulative or harmful to consumers or the market. Careful judgment is required to balance market forces with regulatory compliance and corporate responsibility. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves proactively monitoring global energy market indicators and geopolitical developments that could influence supply and demand within Alabama. This approach necessitates transparent communication with stakeholders regarding potential price fluctuations and the underlying global factors driving them. It also requires the company to maintain robust internal risk management strategies to mitigate the impact of volatility on its operations and to ensure fair pricing practices in compliance with Alabama's energy market regulations. This aligns with the ethical duty to operate responsibly and transparently within the established regulatory framework. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately adjusting wholesale prices upwards in anticipation of a global supply disruption, without a clear, demonstrable link to immediate cost increases or a direct impact on Alabama's supply chain. This could be seen as price gouging or market manipulation, violating principles of fair competition and consumer protection under Alabama law. Another incorrect approach is to remain entirely passive and make no adjustments to pricing or operational strategies, even when significant global events demonstrably impact the cost of energy production or delivery within Alabama. This failure to adapt and manage risk could lead to financial instability for the company and potentially disrupt supply, which is contrary to the public interest and the spirit of regulatory oversight aimed at ensuring reliable energy provision. A further incorrect approach is to selectively disclose information about global events to certain large industrial customers, while withholding it from smaller commercial and residential customers. This creates an unfair information asymmetry, potentially allowing some customers to benefit at the expense of others and undermining the principle of equitable market access and pricing. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Alabama's energy sector should adopt a proactive, informed, and transparent approach. This involves continuous monitoring of global and local market dynamics, understanding the specific regulatory requirements of Alabama, and implementing ethical communication strategies. A decision-making framework should prioritize adherence to the Alabama Public Service Commission's regulations, maintaining market integrity, and fostering trust with all stakeholders by providing clear and consistent information about factors influencing energy prices. Question 15. Operational review demonstrates a noticeable discoloration in the soil and a faint chemical odor emanating from an area adjacent to a newly constructed natural gas pipeline in rural Alabama. The site is located near a small tributary that feeds into a larger river system. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action for the energy company? Option A. Immediately halt all operations in the vicinity of the suspected contamination. Notify the Alabama Department of Environmental Management, ADEM, as per regulatory requirements, and engage a qualified environmental consulting firm to conduct a thorough site assessment and develop a remediation plan. Option B. Document the observation in internal records, but defer any external reporting or investigation until a formal complaint is received from a third party or regulatory agency. Option C. Initiate immediate cleanup of the discolored soil and odor using internal company resources and equipment without notifying ADEM, believing that prompt action will resolve the issue before it becomes a regulatory concern. Option D. Continue pipeline operations while internally investigating the source and extent of the discoloration and odor, assuming it may be a naturally occurring phenomenon or unrelated to the pipeline construction. The correct answer is A. Immediately halt all operations in the vicinity of the suspected contamination. Notify the Alabama Department of Environmental Management, ADEM, as per regulatory requirements, and engage a qualified environmental consulting firm to conduct a thorough site assessment and develop a remediation plan. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the economic imperative of energy production and the legal and ethical obligations to protect Alabama's natural resources. The discovery of potential contamination requires immediate, informed, and legally compliant action, balancing operational continuity with environmental stewardship. Careful judgment is required to navigate the complex regulatory landscape and avoid significant legal and reputational repercussions. The best professional approach involves immediately ceasing the suspected activity and initiating a thorough, documented investigation in strict accordance with the Alabama Department of Environmental Management, ADEM, regulations. This includes prompt notification to ADEM, engaging qualified environmental consultants, and implementing containment measures. This approach is correct because it prioritizes regulatory compliance and proactive environmental protection, which are fundamental tenets of Alabama's environmental laws. Specifically, the Alabama Environmental Management Act and associated ADEM rules mandate reporting of releases and spills and require responsible parties to undertake remediation. Prompt and transparent communication with ADEM is crucial for demonstrating good faith and minimizing penalties. An incorrect approach would be to delay reporting to ADEM while attempting to assess the extent of the contamination internally without engaging external expertise. This failure to promptly notify the regulatory authority violates the reporting requirements under Alabama law and could be interpreted as an attempt to conceal the issue, leading to severe penalties, including fines and potential criminal charges. Another incorrect approach would be to proceed with cleanup efforts without ADEM oversight or consultation, using internal resources that may not be adequately trained or equipped for hazardous material handling. This not only risks exacerbating the contamination, but also bypasses ADEM regulatory authority to approve cleanup plans and ensure proper remediation techniques are employed, violating the principles of environmental management oversight. A further incorrect approach would be to dismiss the findings as insignificant without proper investigation, assuming the observed discoloration is natural or unrelated to the operations. This demonstrates a failure to exercise due diligence and a disregard for potential environmental harm, which is contrary to the precautionary principles embedded in environmental law and could lead to significant long-term liability if contamination is later discovered. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying potential regulatory triggers, such as the observed discoloration. This should be followed by an immediate assessment of applicable Alabama environmental laws and ADEM guidance. The next step involves consulting with legal counsel and environmental experts to develop a compliant and effective response strategy. Transparency, documentation, and proactive engagement with regulatory bodies are paramount throughout the process. Question 16. Cost-benefit analysis shows that a recent surge in natural gas prices, a primary fuel source for electricity generation in Alabama, is projected to significantly increase wholesale electricity costs for the next 18 months. The utility company is considering several strategies to mitigate these increased costs and ensure continued profitability. Which of the following strategies best aligns with regulatory expectations and professional responsibility in Alabama's energy market? Option A. Explore opportunities to purchase electricity from less regulated, out-of-state wholesale markets that may offer lower prices, without significant consultation with the Alabama Public Service Commission. Option B. Conduct a thorough analysis of current and projected supply and demand for electricity in Alabama, considering factors beyond immediate fuel costs, and proactively engage with the Alabama Public Service Commission to present a comprehensive plan for cost recovery and service reliability. Option C. Immediately implement a substantial surcharge on customer bills to offset the projected increase in wholesale energy costs, citing the short-term price spike as justification. Option D. Reduce investment in renewable energy projects and defer planned grid modernization efforts to conserve capital during this period of high fuel prices. Correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough analysis of current and projected supply and demand for electricity in Alabama, considering factors beyond immediate fuel costs, and proactively engage with the Alabama Public Service Commission to present a comprehensive plan for cost recovery and service reliability. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate financial pressures of a utility company with its long-term obligations to serve the public interest and maintain grid stability in Alabama. The decision-maker must navigate the complex interplay of market forces, regulatory oversight by the Alabama Public Service Commission, PSC, and the ethical imperative to provide reliable and affordable energy. Misjudging the supply and demand dynamics could lead to significant financial penalties, reputational damage, and most importantly, harm to Alabama consumers through price volatility or service disruptions. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a comprehensive assessment of current and projected supply and demand within Alabama's energy market, considering all available data sources. This includes analyzing historical consumption patterns, economic indicators affecting demand, planned generation capacity additions or retirements, fuel price forecasts, and potential impacts of weather events. The utility should then engage proactively with the Alabama PSC, presenting a well-reasoned case for any proposed adjustments to supply or pricing mechanisms, demonstrating how these actions align with the PSC's mandate to ensure just and reasonable rates and reliable service for Alabama residents. This approach prioritizes transparency, data-driven decision-making, and regulatory compliance, ensuring that any strategic shifts are justifiable and in the public interest. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach would be to unilaterally implement significant price increases based solely on a short-term spike in wholesale energy costs without thorough analysis or consultation. This fails to consider the Alabama PSC's oversight role and the requirement for demonstrating that such increases are necessary and reasonable to meet the utility's obligations. It also ignores the potential for demand destruction and the negative impact on vulnerable consumers. Another incorrect approach would be to delay necessary investments in supply diversification or infrastructure upgrades, hoping that market conditions will improve on their own. This neglects the long-term implications of supply-demand imbalances and could lead to future reliability issues or even higher costs for consumers if supply constraints become severe. It also fails to proactively address potential regulatory concerns about future service adequacy. A third incorrect approach would be to solely focus on maximizing short-term profits by exploiting temporary supply shortages, without considering the broader impact on grid stability and consumer affordability in Alabama. This disregards the utility's public service obligation and the ethical responsibility to provide essential services at fair prices, potentially leading to regulatory sanctions and loss of public trust. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Alabama's energy sector must adopt a forward-looking, data-informed, and transparent approach. This involves continuous monitoring of market dynamics, understanding the regulatory landscape governed by the Alabama PSC, and prioritizing the long-term reliability and affordability of energy for consumers. When faced with supply and demand challenges, the decision-making process should involve rigorous analysis, proactive engagement with regulators, and a clear articulation of how proposed actions serve the public interest while ensuring the financial health of the utility. Question 17. Risk assessment procedures indicate a potential opportunity to develop a new energy source within Alabama, considering the state's regulatory framework, which approach best balances economic development with environmental stewardship and legal compliance. Option A. Conduct a comprehensive life cycle environmental impact assessment verify compliance with all relevant Alabama statutes and regulations, and engage with local stakeholders to address concerns before proceeding with development. Option B. Prioritize rapid deployment and cost-effectiveness by adopting standard industry practices from other regions without specific verification against Alabama's environmental laws. Option C. Focus solely on the technical feasibility and immediate economic benefits of the energy source, deferring any environmental impact studies or regulatory compliance checks until after initial operational phases. Option D. Proceed with development based on initial economic projections, assuming that general environmental best practices will suffice without detailed state-specific regulatory review. The correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive life-cycle environmental impact assessment, verify compliance with all relevant Alabama statutes and regulations, and engage with local stakeholders to address concerns before proceeding with development. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the economic benefits of utilizing a specific energy source with the potential environmental impacts and regulatory compliance obligations under Alabama law. Decision-makers must navigate the complexities of energy resource development, public interest, and adherence to state statutes governing environmental protection and energy production. Careful judgment is required to select an approach that is both legally sound and ethically responsible. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a comprehensive assessment of the proposed energy source's life cycle impacts, including its environmental footprint, economic viability, and alignment with Alabama's renewable energy goals and environmental regulations. This approach prioritizes thorough due diligence, stakeholder engagement, and adherence to the Alabama Environmental Management Act and any specific statutes related to the chosen energy source. It ensures that decisions are informed by scientific data, legal requirements, and consideration of long-term sustainability, thereby minimizing legal risks and promoting responsible resource management. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves prioritizing immediate cost savings and rapid deployment of the energy source without adequately evaluating its long-term environmental consequences or compliance with Alabama's stringent environmental permitting processes. This failure to conduct a comprehensive environmental impact assessment could lead to significant legal penalties, remediation costs, and reputational damage, violating the spirit and letter of Alabama environmental law. Another unacceptable approach is to proceed based solely on industry best practices from other states without verifying their applicability and compliance with Alabama-specific regulations. Alabama has its own unique legal framework for energy development and environmental protection, and failing to adhere to these specific statutes, such as those governing water quality or air emissions, constitutes a direct regulatory violation. A third flawed approach is to disregard potential community concerns or opposition regarding the energy source's impact, focusing only on the technical feasibility and economic projections. While not always a direct statutory violation, ignoring stakeholder input can lead to protracted legal battles, permit denials, and significant project delays, undermining the overall success and public acceptance of the energy initiative, and potentially conflicting with principles of responsible governance often implied in regulatory frameworks. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic decision-making process that begins with a thorough understanding of the relevant Alabama statutes and regulations governing energy development and environmental protection. This includes identifying all applicable permits, environmental review requirements, and public notice obligations. The next step involves conducting a comprehensive risk assessment that considers environmental, economic, and social factors. Engaging with legal counsel specializing in Alabama energy and environmental law is crucial to ensure compliance. Finally, decisions should be made based on a holistic evaluation that prioritizes long-term sustainability, regulatory adherence, and responsible stewardship of Alabama's resources. Question 18. The monitoring system demonstrates that a significant portion of Alabama Power Company's generation assets are operating at efficiency levels that are competitive within the regional wholesale electricity market, but these levels are not fully aligned with the lowest possible cost of service benchmarks typically applied to its regulated retail service territory. Considering Alabama's evolving energy market structures, which of the following operational evaluations is most appropriate for these assets? Option A. Assume that all generation assets must strictly adhere to cost of service principles, as the company is a regulated utility and any deviation is a regulatory concern. Option B. Prioritize achieving the absolute lowest cost of service benchmarks, as these are the foundational principles for all regulated utility operations in Alabama, regardless of market participation. Option C. Evaluate the assets based on their demonstrated ability to perform competitively in the wholesale market, recognizing that market dynamics and efficiency standards may differ from those applied to regulated retail service. Option D. Focus solely on internal operational metrics without considering their implications for wholesale market competitiveness or the potential for cost recovery in that market. The correct answer is C. Evaluate the assets based on their demonstrated ability to perform competitively in the wholesale market, recognizing that market dynamics and efficiency standards may differ from those applied to regulated retail service. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a nuanced understanding of Alabama's energy market structure, specifically distinguishing between the principles governing competitive markets and those applicable to regulated utilities. The Alabama Public Service Commission, APSC, oversees both, but the regulatory frameworks and expectations differ significantly. A professional must correctly identify which framework applies to the situation to ensure compliance and promote efficient market outcomes or consumer protection as intended by law. The correct approach involves recognizing that the generation and sale of electricity in Alabama are increasingly subject to competitive market principles, particularly for wholesale power. This means that pricing, supply, and demand are largely determined by market forces, with regulatory oversight focused on ensuring fair competition, market integrity, and preventing undue market power. The Alabama Power Company, while a regulated utility for its retail service territory, also participates in wholesale markets where competitive principles are paramount. Therefore, when evaluating the operational efficiency and cost-effectiveness of power generation assets that could serve both regulated and potentially competitive wholesale markets, a focus on market-based performance metrics and the ability to compete effectively is the most appropriate regulatory and ethical stance. This aligns with the state's efforts to foster a more dynamic energy sector while ensuring reliability. An incorrect approach would be to solely apply the cost of service regulation principles designed for a captive retail customer base to all aspects of power generation. This framework, while essential for ensuring fair retail rates, does not adequately capture the dynamics of competitive wholesale markets, can lead to an underestimation of the importance of operational efficiency driven by market competition, and may stifle innovation or investment in assets that are best suited for a competitive environment. Another incorrect approach is to assume that all electricity generation in Alabama operates under a purely regulated, non-competitive model. This ignores the significant liberalization that has occurred in the wholesale electricity markets, where generators compete to supply power. Applying a purely regulated mindset to these competitive segments would misinterpret market signals and lead to suboptimal operational decisions. Finally, an approach that prioritizes internal operational metrics without considering their impact on market competitiveness or the potential for cost recovery in a competitive wholesale environment is also flawed. While internal efficiency is important, its ultimate value in a competitive market is its ability to allow the generator to offer power at a price that is competitive and acceptable to buyers in that market. Professionals in Alabama's energy sector should employ a decision-making process that first identifies the specific market context, regulated retail, competitive wholesale, or a hybrid for the asset or operation in question. They should then consult the relevant APSC regulations and guidance pertaining to that specific market structure. Ethical considerations involve ensuring transparency, fairness, and the pursuit of outcomes that benefit consumers, whether through competitive pricing or regulated rate stability, as dictated by the applicable framework. Question 19. Regulatory review indicates that an energy company is planning to construct a new high-voltage transmission line across multiple counties in Alabama. To ensure compliance with state law and facilitate project approval, which of the following actions represents the most prudent and legally sound approach for the energy company? Option A. Commence construction of the transmission line, assuming that local county permits are sufficient for such infrastructure projects. Option B. Initiate early and ongoing engagement with the Alabama Public Service Commission, submitting a detailed application that addresses all statutory requirements and anticipated impacts. Option C. Seek approval exclusively from the relevant county commissions for zoning and land use, bypassing the Alabama Public Service Commission. Option D. Submit an application to the Alabama Public Service Commission that omits detailed environmental impact studies, citing cost and time constraints. The correct answer is B. Initiate early and ongoing engagement with the Alabama Public Service Commission, submitting a detailed application that addresses all statutory requirements and anticipated impacts. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires navigating the complex regulatory landscape of Alabama's energy sector, specifically concerning the oversight of new transmission infrastructure. The Alabama Public Service Commission, APSC, is the primary regulatory body responsible for approving such projects, balancing the need for reliable energy supply with environmental and economic considerations. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with all applicable statutes and regulations, avoiding potential legal challenges and operational delays. The best professional approach involves proactively engaging with the Alabama Public Service Commission early in the project development phase. This entails submitting a comprehensive application that clearly outlines the project's scope, anticipated benefits, environmental impact assessments, and proposed mitigation strategies. Furthermore, it requires demonstrating how the project aligns with Alabama's energy policies and statutory requirements for utility infrastructure. This proactive engagement allows for potential issues to be identified and addressed collaboratively with the APSC, fostering transparency and increasing the likelihood of a smooth approval process. This aligns with the APSC mandate to ensure public interest is served by utility operations and infrastructure development. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with significant construction without obtaining the necessary approvals from the Alabama Public Service Commission. This directly violates Alabama Code Title 37, Chapter 2, which grants the APSC authority over the construction and operation of public utility facilities, including transmission lines. Such an action would likely result in immediate cease and desist orders, substantial fines, and potentially the forced dismantling of the unapproved infrastructure, leading to significant financial losses and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach would be to submit an incomplete or misleading application to the Alabama Public Service Commission. This could involve omitting critical environmental data or misrepresenting the project's economic benefits. Such actions undermine the APSC ability to conduct a thorough review and make informed decisions, potentially leading to the denial of the application or the imposition of onerous conditions. This failure to provide accurate and complete information constitutes a breach of professional ethics and regulatory compliance, as it obstructs the regulatory process. Finally, attempting to bypass the Alabama Public Service Commission by seeking approval solely from local county commissions would be an ineffective and legally unsound strategy. While local entities may have some zoning or land use authority, the APSC holds exclusive jurisdiction over the siting and approval of major energy transmission infrastructure within Alabama. Relying on local approvals alone would ignore the overarching state-level regulatory framework, rendering any such approvals invalid for the purpose of constructing transmission lines. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding the specific regulatory mandates of the Alabama Public Service Commission. This involves thorough research into Alabama Code, APSC rules and regulations, and relevant case law. Before initiating any significant project activities, a comprehensive assessment of all required permits and approvals should be conducted. Proactive communication and collaboration with the regulatory agency, coupled with the submission of complete and accurate documentation, are paramount to achieving successful project outcomes within the established legal and regulatory boundaries. Question 20. Performance analysis shows that an international energy consortium is proposing a significant investment in a new natural gas extraction and processing facility within Alabama. The consortium has provided projected cash flows for the next 20 years, denominated in US dollars. However, they have proposed using a discount rate of 8% for their net present value (NPV) calculation, citing it as the average risk-adjusted rate for similar international projects. Alabama's severance tax rate on natural gas is 6% of the gross value, and the state's average cost of capital for comparable domestic energy projects is estimated at 7.5%. Assuming the projected annual gross revenue for the first year is $50 million, and it is expected to grow at 2% annually, calculate the NPV of the project for the first year of operation using the consortium's proposed discount rate, and then recalculate it using a discount rate that more accurately reflects Alabama's regulatory and economic environment, assuming a constant severance tax and revenue growth. Option A, NPV using Alabama adjusted rate, $40,000,000,000,000. Option B, NPV using Alabama adjusted rate, $36,500,000,000. Option C, NPV using Alabama adjusted rate, $35,000,000,000,000. Option D, NPV using Alabama adjusted rate, $38,461,538.46. Correct answer is D, NPV using Alabama adjusted rate, $38,461,538.46. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent complexities of international energy project financing, specifically the application of Alabama's regulatory framework to a project with potential cross-border implications. The core challenge lies in accurately calculating the present value of future revenue streams, considering varying international discount rates and the specific tax implications under Alabama law, while ensuring compliance with both state energy regulations and sound financial principles. Miscalculation can lead to undercapitalization, regulatory noncompliance, or suboptimal investment decisions, all of which carry significant financial and legal ramifications for the project and the state. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a rigorous application of discounted cash flow (DCF) analysis, utilizing a weighted average cost of capital (WACC) that accurately reflects the risk profile of the specific international energy project, adjusted for Alabama's tax environment. This approach involves projecting future revenues and expenses, applying a discount rate derived from comparable international projects but benchmarked against the cost of capital for similar Alabama-based energy ventures, and then incorporating Alabama's specific severance taxes and any applicable state-level incentives or surcharges. The formula for net present value (NPV) is \NPV equals \sum t equals 1n \frac CFT, 1 plus RT initial investment where CFT is the net cash flow in year \T R is the discount rate, and N is the number of periods. Discount rate R will be a WACC, carefully constructed to reflect the project's specific risks and the cost of capital in Alabama, adjusted for international market conditions. This method directly addresses the requirement to assess the project's financial viability under Alabama's regulatory and economic conditions, ensuring that the projected returns are sufficient to justify the investment and meet state energy development goals. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to solely use a generic international discount rate without any adjustment for Alabama's specific economic conditions or tax regime. This fails to comply with Alabama's regulatory framework, which mandates that energy projects operate within the state's economic and tax realities. The ethical failure here is a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the specific legal and financial environment in which the project is intended to operate. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the international aspects of the project and only consider domestic Alabama discount rates. This would misrepresent the project's true risk profile and cost of capital, as international operations inherently carry different risks, e.g., currency fluctuation, political instability, that must be factored into the financial assessment. This approach violates the principle of accurate financial forecasting and could lead to an artificially inflated NPV, masking potential financial vulnerabilities. A third incorrect approach would be to apply Alabama's standard corporate income tax rate to the projected international revenues, without considering specific international tax treaties or the tax implications of repatriating profits back to Alabama. This would lead to an inaccurate calculation of after-tax cash flows, misrepresenting the project's profitability and potentially leading to noncompliance with both state and international tax laws. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such scenarios by first thoroughly understanding the specific regulatory requirements of Alabama's energy sector, including tax laws, environmental regulations, and any state-specific incentives or mandates. They should then identify all relevant financial variables, including projected revenues, operating costs, capital expenditures, and tax liabilities, both domestically and internationally. The critical step is to construct a robust financial model that integrates these variables, employing appropriate valuation techniques like DCF analysis. This model must use a discount rate that accurately reflects the project's risk profile, considering both international market conditions and Alabama's economic context. Regular review and validation of assumptions against current market data and regulatory updates are essential to ensure the integrity of the financial assessment and maintain professional accountability.